This is my 2022 Commencal Clash that I built up, one of the most versatile 27.5 bikes I've ever ridden. And stick around, I'm gonna tell you why I'm selling it. All right, so I said it's one of the most versatile 27.5 bikes I've ever ridden, and this is a rad bike. And why am I selling it? We'll get to that later. But let's talk about the 3 different configurations that you can do on this bike. Number 1, you can set it up in regular mode, which is 27.5 front and rear, and you have 180 in the front, 170 in the rear. How it comes stock, great bike. You can also set it up in mullet, where you get a 170 millimeter 29er fork and 29er wheel and still rock that 27.5 in the rear. And then, last but not least, you can set it up in a full downhill mode. 200 millimeters of travel in the front and 170 in the rear. And trust me, it's plenty for downhill. I took it to a bike park, it was amazing. Let's talk a little bit how I set this bike up. I tend to always run a rear coil shock. It's just what I like to do because I like to set it and forget it, you know, when it comes to suspension. And on this particular build, I did a Marzocchi Bomber CR, which is one of my favorite coils right now because they're super simple and I don't have to really like think about too much stuff. It's just got rebound and compression. All I really need for my kind of trail riding and my kind of jumping and bike parks and that kind of stuff. I don't need to have like all this crazy suspension, it's just not my thing. I feel like I get better results when I use a coil. They feel a bit more plush, more planted, and you know, that's just kind of how I like to run it. I've been using the RockShox Zeb fork for the last 1.5 years and I'm stuck on that fork. Didn't go too crazy on this build because I wasn't sure if this was going to be the bike that I would keep. So I went with the SRAM NX drivetrain when I was all set up in Enduro style, and then I threw on my Cane Creek E-Wings, but I already had those cranks, so I didn't go out and buy those. And then when I had it set up in downhill, I used the Box 1 DH cassette and derailleur. I mean, another reason why I wanted to get this bike is because I always wanted to try out an aluminum frame because I had been on carbon frames for the last, I don't know, 1.5 years, almost 2 years. And I also wanted to try out a long travel 27.5 bike. So, you know, this was definitely the top choice to get in my opinion and for price. Some people ride short travel, some people ride long travel. Me personally, I always like to ride something that has 160 or more travel in the rear and usually about 180 in the front, just for what I like to do. And you know, it is kind of a pain to climb with that kind of stuff, but I don't really care. The first setup I want to talk about is the stock configuration, which is 180 millimeters of travel in the front and 170 millimeters of travel in the rear, set up with full 27.5. This setup felt really good with the RockShox Zeb up front. It took a little bit of getting used to because I was coming from a 29er the last couple years. The pros of having a 27.5 enduro bike is that it's playful. You can jump around the trail and have a lot of fun. You can find yourself jibbing on all kinds of things that are out there. The one thing that I did find a little more difficult, even though the bike was more playful and agile, at slower speeds, the bike felt so sluggish, like hard to keep up with my buddy. As you can see from these clips right here, I was riding with my buddy Drew and I had to push really hard just to keep up with him on a 29er. So right off the bat, I did notice a huge difference. I mean, he's fast as it is, but I still noticed a huge difference on trying to keep up with somebody on a 29er being on a 27.5. Like, definitely a huge difference. You have to work a little harder. I'm not a pro rider, so take that into account as well. Now let's get into the second setup that I did. The second setup that I did was setting it up in mullet, where you have a 29er in the front with 170 millimeters on a RockShox Zeb fork to match the stock setup, which was a 27.5 wheel with 180 millimeters of travel. There's a little tiny little bit in there that you have to change because 29er wheel is bigger, so therefore you want to get a 27.5 wheel on there, you're going to have a longer fork, and if you're going to get a 29er wheel on there, you're going to have a shortened fork. So it only shortens about 10 millimeters, so that's what they say is about the ratio of like putting it on the same frame and swapping it out and making it work. So that's what I did. And I did once again the RockShox Zeb fork, so everything still felt pretty close to what I liked. And then I decided to take it out to a bike park called Sunrise Bike Park, which is the only bike park in Arizona at the time. And it's pretty rad. It's very chunky, a lot of black diamond trails, and a lot of like really gnarly tech stuff. This thing set up as a mullet was awesome. When you're on the steep, chunky stuff, it was amazing having the 29er in the front roll over everything. 27.5 in the rear was really agile and easy to move around. The hype is real with the mullet setup. Everyone should try a mullet once in their life. It's awesome. All right, now let's talk about configuration number 3. Configuration number 3 was when I set it up, full downhill, 27.5 in the front, 27.5 in the rear, but I had 200 millimeters of travel in the front, and I still had my 170 in the rear. I did run a Cane Creek progressive spring to make it to where I could still hit a lot of big jumps. I almost feel like it was a little too stiff, but you know, I did feel as if like I had all the travel I needed, especially with that spring that was a little bit heavier. I'd have to say, having this bike set up in full downhill was my favorite setup. I'm not sure if it's the 200 millimeter fork up front that is more forgiving than other forks, or the simplicity of not having a dropper and less gears, but I enjoyed this setup the best. This thing was super fast at Snow Summit. I found myself over jumping some of the jumps and casing the other ones. It was hard to get used to at first because I was so used to riding Snow Summit on a 29er, but once I got the hang of this bike, it was super fast and super solid on the trails. To be honest, the geometry of this frame very much reminded me of like a slope style dirt jumper bike with 200 millimeters of travel in the front. You know, it raised the front end a lot, which I actually prefer because it reminds me of Evil, and that's what I ride the most. And I really truly believe that this bike setup in downhill, it felt better than any of the other setups. It's very similar to Commencal's downhill bike. I was almost thinking about buying that bike, but I didn't, only because I wanted to be able to have a bike that could do more things, you know? The Furious is set up for downhill only. That's what it's built for. I figured with the Commencal Clash, it's the closest thing I can get to having a downhill bike that's also able to pedal pretty good, because you can throw the mullet setup on there or you can throw the stock setup on there and it's still a nice enduro bike. All right, let's talk about the bike overall. Commencal are aluminum frame slash bikes, and they have some pretty good bikes from what I've heard and seen. This bike feels solid and aggressive when you ride it. It can handle big jumps and downhill trails like the best bikes out there. It feels better pointed down than up. Climbing isn't the greatest thing, but downhill makes up for that. It's a good bike at a very decent price. The frame alone cost me about $1,700 with no rear shock. The whole build was probably about $3,500. And now let's get to the reason why I'm selling it. It's not because Commencal is a bad bike, nor do I not like aluminum frames. I think Commencal is a great company, and I think their aluminum frames are pretty awesome. Like, if you don't want a carbon frame, I do recommend their frames. But the main reason why I'm selling is because I've realized after riding this bike, I like 29er more. I've been riding 29ers for 2 years, and I really got to do a back-to-back test. When I was at Purgatory, the bike park in Durango, Colorado, I actually was riding the Commencal most of that day. And I was having fun, it was great. I was set up in mullet, so I had a 29er in the front. It was rolling over everything, and the bike did awesome. And I had brought my Evil Offering just in case, you know, because I was in Colorado, so if anything happened to a bike, I like to have a backup bike. I was like, you know what, I'm gonna try the Evil Offering out here. The 29er, 140 millimeters of travel, so it was just a trail bike. I couldn't get too radical on it, but the trails at Purgatory aren't too bad. They're just very chunky. And let me tell you, I got up to the top of the mountain and got on my Evil Offering, and I felt way better on the Evil Offering. I went way faster on the Evil Offering. It just all around felt really good. And the main reason that I figured that out is because I love 29er wheels so much more. Like, they just feel so much better. Even having the mullet setup was almost as good as a 29er. It wasn't quite there. It was that rolling speed that you get on a 29er where you're just flying, man. But I've realized for my riding, I ride more stuff where I'm doing more trails than I am doing bike parks, so 27.5 just isn't the bike for me. I sold my Evil Reckoning LB, which was a 2019 model. It was the best bike I've ever ridden. You can see from the link right here, somewhere up here or over here, I had a video that I did about the Evil Reckoning being one of the best bikes I ever ridden, and it can do it all. And I should have never sold it. I regretted every second of that after I sold it. To make up for that, this is why I'm selling the Commencal Clash, because I wanted the Evil Reckoning again. So I bought the Evil Reckoning V3. I'd have to say, I'm a fan of that bike, and that's the main reason why I'm selling the Commencal, main reason why I sold my Evil Insurgent. 27.5 is just not for me. I love 29ers. So at the end of the day, 27.5 versus 29er, that's on you, I don't know. You just have to figure out what you like the most. For me, 29er is the way to go. It's what I'm gonna ride. I'm not gonna mess around with 27.5 anymore. I mean, maybe in the future, but it's just not where I'm going right now. I wanna just stick to one bike right now. That's gonna be my Evil Reckoning, because that's the bike I'm used to and that's the bike I wanna ride, and I jump good on it and I go fast on it, and the 29ers are just bee's knees for me. And at the end of the day, there's only one thing you can do. You can start small and go huge. Thanks for watching.